Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving deep into one of history's most enigmatic, powerful, and utterly mysterious royal bloodlines that time has nearly forgotten. From sacred kings with healing powers, to long-haired warriors who claim divine descent. From hidden treasures buried beneath ancient churches, to symbols so secret they've been whispered about for 15 centuries. The Merovingians ruled what would become France for nearly 300 years, yet most people have never even heard their name. That means there's a whole chapter of history hidden in plain sight, filled with secrets that would make even the most elaborate conspiracy theories seem tame by comparison. So before we travel back to the shadowy forests of Dark Age Europe together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy unraveling hidden history with me. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what drew you to this mysterious bloodline. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to join us on these journeys into history's most guarded secrets. Now dim the lights, maybe pour yourself a glass of mead like our Merovingian ancestors would have enjoyed, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the bloodline that came before the Templars. When you think of medieval Europe, you might picture knights in shining armor, grand cathedrals, and kings sitting on ornate thrones. But tonight, we're going somewhere else entirely. We're going to the Twilight Era when Rome had fallen, when literacy had nearly vanished, and when a mysterious dynasty of long-haired kings established the foundation of European civilization as we know it. The Merovingian age isn't just history, it's a half-lit world between documented fact and swirling legend, filled with rulers so extraordinary they were believed to have magical powers, and whose bloodline was said to carry a secret so profound it has been protected by secret societies for thousands of years. Picture this. It's the 5th century, and the Western Roman Empire is collapsing into chaos. From the forests of what is now Germany emerges a tribe led by warriors with flowing hair that they never cut, a symbol of their sacred power and connection to otherworldly forces. These aren't just tribal chieftains, they're the Merovingians, named after their semi-legendary founder Merovex, a king whose very birth was shrouded in supernatural mystery. And in that darkness of early medieval Europe, where written records are scarce and oral tradition reigns supreme, the Merovingians rise to power with an aura so magnetic, so different from other rulers, that people whispered they were not entirely human. The Merovingian kings didn't just rule through military might or political cunning, though they certainly possessed both. They ruled through a kind of mystical authority that made people believe these kings had one foot in this world and one foot in the realm of the divine. Down there in the mist-covered forests and newly built wooden churches, a new kind of power was taking shape, one that would eventually transform into the divine right of kings that dominated European politics for 1,000 years. And yet the Merovingians themselves would eventually be overthrown, their bloodline supposedly extinguished, their secrets buried beneath centuries of carefully constructed historical narratives. But here's what really keeps historians and researchers awake at night. What if the Merovingian bloodline wasn't actually destroyed? What if it went underground, protected by secret keepers who understood its true significance? Every ancient text we re-examine, every medieval church we investigate, brings back clues that suggest the Merovingian legacy didn't end in the 8th century as conventional history tells us. And for every new discovery, 10 more questions emerge from the shadows. The Merovingians have been keeping their secrets for 15 centuries, and they're not about to give them up easily. They guard their mysteries jealously, hidden beneath layers of myth, folklore, and deliberate misdirection. But tonight, we're going to peel back those layers and explore some of the most spine-tingling, mind-bending, absolutely fascinating secrets that lie at the heart of the Merovingian legacy. Because if you think you know medieval history, wait until you hear about the bloodline that was considered so special, so sacred, that it may have been the true reason behind the formation of the Knights Templar centuries later. And the really unsettling part, we're just beginning to scratch the surface. Let's start our journey with the origin of the Merovingians, a tale so strange it sounds like it came straight out of ancient mythology. According to the 7th century chronicle of Fredegar, Merovech, the dynasty's founder, wasn't entirely human. The chronicler tells us that Merovech's mother, the wife of King Clodio, went swimming in the ocean one day. While in the water, she encountered a mysterious creature described as a beast of Neptune, similar to a quinator, a 5-horned sea creature. This encounter resulted in the birth of Merovech, who was said to have the blood of 2 fathers, one human and one divine. This isn't just some quirky medieval tale that we can dismiss as superstition. It was the founding myth of the most powerful dynasty in early medieval Europe, rulers who conquered and united what would become France. The implications are staggering. The Merovingians weren't just claiming divine right like later kings would. They were claiming divine blood, a direct supernatural lineage that made them fundamentally different from those they ruled over. They were sacred kings in the most literal sense. And their contemporaries believed it. Throughout Merovingian rule, these kings were attributed with magical healing powers, particularly the ability to cure scrofula, a form of tuberculosis, with nothing but a touch of their hand. Pilgrims and the sick would travel hundreds of miles just for the chance to be touched by a Merovingian king. The long, flowing hair that Merovingian kings famously never cut wasn't just a fashion statement, it was believed to be the source of their supernatural power, their connection to whatever otherworldly force had sired their ancestor. When a Merovingian king was ceremonially deposed, they didn't just take his crown, they cut his hair, severing his connection to the divine. This is why Samson lost his strength when Delilah cut his hair in the biblical tale. It's the same archetypal story of power residing in uncut locks. The Merovingians took this to an extreme, with historical accounts describing royal hair that would flow down to their waists or even their feet, carefully maintained as the physical manifestation of their sacred authority. The Merovingian kings didn't just rule differently, they were buried differently too. Archaeological excavations of Merovingian royal tombs have revealed burial practices unlike anything seen before in Europe. The tombs contained strange ritualistic objects, bees made of solid gold, and cryptic symbols that scholars still debate the meaning of today. Childeric Ineth, father of Clovis, was buried with over 300 miniature golden bees, symbols that would later be adopted by Napoleon himself when he wanted to connect his empire to the ancient Merovingian mystique. These weren't just decorative items. They were symbols of a sacred tradition, one that connected the Merovingians to something far older and more mysterious. The bee symbolism appears in ancient Egyptian religion, in Minoan culture, and in early Judaic mysticism. It represents divine message-bearing, immortality, and resurrection. Why would a supposedly barbarian king from the forests of Germany be buried with such sophisticated symbolic objects? Unless, of course, the Merovingians weren't quite what history has led us to believe. But the mystery only deepens when we look at how the Merovingians interacted with early Christianity. Clovis I, the greatest Merovingian king, converted to Catholicism around 496 CE, supposedly after winning a battle where he had called upon Christ for help. But historical records suggest his conversion wasn't quite as straightforward as the church later portrayed it. The Merovingians practiced a unique form of Christianity, one that incorporated elements of their older pagan beliefs and contained hints of what we would now recognize as Gnostic ideas. They built churches and cathedrals, yes, but often on top of ancient sacred sites with architectural alignments to the solstices and equinoxes. They honored Christ, but they seemed to view him through a different lens than Orthodox Christianity, not just as the Son of God, but as someone who, like them, carried divine blood in his veins. This brings us to perhaps the most controversial and explosive theory about the Merovingians, one that still sends shockwaves through religious and historical circles whenever it's mentioned. Some researchers and historians have proposed that the Merovingians believed themselves to be direct descendants of Jesus Christ himself, not through some spiritual connection, but through an actual bloodline. According to this theory, Christ didn't die on the cross as conventional Christianity teaches, but survived, married Mary Magdalene, and had children whose descendants eventually became the Merovingian kings. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to believe about this extraordinary claim, but what's undeniable is that the Merovingians themselves seem to hint at such a connection. Their unique form of Christianity, their claims of sacred healing powers similar to those attributed to Christ, their insistence on their divine blood. All of these point to a belief system that saw them as carriers of something profoundly special, a bloodline with direct connections to divinity. And here's where it gets truly interesting. The symbol of the fish, which early Christians used secretly to identify each other, was also prominently featured in Merovingian iconography. But for the Merovingians, it wasn't just a symbol of faith, it was a symbol of bloodline. The word Merovingian itself might contain this hidden meaning. Some scholars suggest it derives from mer, meaning sea, and vingian relating to vine or lineage, literally lineage from the sea, a possible reference to their mythical origin with the sea creature, or perhaps to something even more profound, the bloodline of Christ coming across the Mediterranean. What if the most guarded secret of the Merovingians wasn't just that they claimed descent from Christ, but that they had evidence to prove it? The implications would be earth-shattering for established Christianity. It would mean that Christ's bloodline didn't end at the crucifixion, but continued through a royal dynasty that shaped European history. It would mean that the divine wasn't just something to be worshipped in churches, but something that flowed through human veins. This brings us to one of the most enigmatic figures in Merovingian history, Dagobert II, whose assassination in 679 CE marked a critical turning point. Dagobert was the last truly powerful Merovingian king, and his death paved the way for the rise of the Carolingian dynasty, which would eventually produce Charlemagne. But what if Dagobert's death wasn't just a political assassination? What if it was an attempt to eliminate a bloodline that threatened the very foundations of the church's power? Before his death, Dagobert had spent years in exile in Ireland and Britain, regions where Celtic Christianity, a form of faith quite different from Roman Catholicism, was still practiced. When he returned to claim his throne, he brought with him not just political ambitions, but possibly a different understanding of Christianity itself, one that emphasized direct spiritual connection rather than church hierarchy. And more dangerously for the powers of his time, he may have brought with him knowledge about his own bloodline and its true significance. The assassination of Dagobert II happened while he was hunting in the Ardennes forest on December 23, 679. He was stabbed through the eye, a symbolically significant method of execution that has parallels in other sacred king traditions. With his death, the Merovingian dynasty began its decline, gradually becoming puppet kings controlled by the Carolingian mayors of the palace, until finally being deposed entirely when Pepin the Short, father of Charlemagne, seized the throne in 751 with the blessing of the Pope. But here's the question that haunts researchers to this day. Did the Merovingian bloodline truly end, or did it go underground, protected by those who understood its significance? There are tantalizing clues that suggest the latter. Historical records show that Dagobert II had a son, Sigisbert IV, who disappeared from official history after his father's assassination. But what if he didn't die? What if he was hidden away, protected by loyal supporters who understood the importance of preserving the bloodline? The region of Restless in southern France, particularly the mysterious village of Rennes-le-Château, has long been associated with legends of a surviving Merovingian bloodline. In the late 19th century, a parish priest named Berenger Saunière made a discovery in his church that suddenly made him extraordinarily wealthy. He spent the rest of his life renovating the church with bizarre symbolic imagery, including a demon at the entrance holding up the holy water font with the inscription, "By this sign you will conquer him," a strange inversion of Constantine's famous vision. What did Saunière find? Some believe it was evidence of the surviving Merovingian bloodline, possibly documents or artifacts that proved their divine descent. Whatever it was valuable enough that the church allegedly paid him for his silence. The church he renovated is filled with coded messages and strange symbolism that researchers are still trying to decipher today. One recurring theme? The concept of a hidden bloodline, represented through Mary Magdalene, who features prominently in the church's iconography. And this brings us to one of the most persistent theories about the Merovingians, their connection to the enigmatic Priory of Sion, a secret society allegedly founded to protect the surviving Merovingian bloodline. According to this theory, the Priory has counted among its members some of history's most brilliant minds, including Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo, all working secretly to preserve the knowledge of the true Merovingian legacy. The Priory of Sion first came to public attention in the 1960s through a series of mysterious documents deposited in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. These documents, known as the Dossier Secrets, contain genealogies supposedly showing the survival of the Merovingian bloodline through various noble houses of Europe, eventually connecting to a figure named Pierre Plantard, who claimed to be a direct descendant of Dagobert II. Many historians dismiss the Priory of Sion as an elaborate hoax created by Plantard himself. But even if the specific claims about the Priory are questionable, they point to a deeper truth: the persistent belief that the Merovingian bloodline held a secret so profound that it needed to be protected at all costs. And this brings us to the Knights Templar, the legendary warrior monks whose own mysterious history may be inextricably linked to the Merovingian legacy. The Knights Templar were founded in 1119. Ostensibly to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But within a few decades, they had become one of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe, with vast wealth, lands, and influence that far exceeded what would be needed for their stated purpose. They answered only to the Pope, operated outside the control of kings, and developed sophisticated financial systems that essentially created Europe's first banking network. But what if their true purpose wasn't just protecting pilgrims? What if they were created to guard a secret? Specifically, the secret of the Merovingian bloodline. The Templars spent their early years excavating beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the site of Solomon's temple. According to various accounts, they found something there, something so significant that it changed the nature of their mission entirely. What if what they found was evidence confirming the Merovingian claim of divine descent? The timing is certainly suggestive. The Templars emerged just as interest in the Holy Grail legends was beginning to spread throughout Europe. And what is the Grail in its essence? In the earliest versions of the legend, it wasn't a cup but a bloodline. The Sangreal or royal blood. The Grail romances, with their tales of sacred bloodlines and hidden knowledge, emerged at precisely the time when the Templars were rising to power. Coincidence? Perhaps not. The Templars' sudden and brutal suppression in 1307 by King Philip IV of France, with the reluctant blessing of Pope Clement V, has long been attributed to the king's desire for their wealth. But what if Philip was eliminating a greater threat, an organization that possessed knowledge that could undermine the very foundations of royal and church authority? What if the Templars were guardians not just of material treasure, but of a truth about divine bloodlines that threatened the established order? On Friday, October 13th, 1307, the origin of the superstition. About Friday the 13th being unlucky, Philip's forces arrested Templar knights across France. The charges against them were bizarre: worshipping a head called Baphomet, denying Christ, ritual kissing, and other heretical practices. Under torture, many Templars confessed to these accusations, though most recanted when given the chance. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314, allegedly prophesying that both King Philip and Pope Clement would join him in death within a year, a prophecy that came true. But did all the Templars perish, or did some escape with their secrets intact? The Templar fleet, based at La Rochelle, famously vanished just before the arrests, taking with them whatever treasures and knowledge the order possessed. Some historians believe they fled to Scotland, which was under excommunication at the time, and thus a safe haven from papal authority. Others suggest Portugal, where the Templars simply reformed as the Order of Christ. And still others point to the possibility that they made their way to the New World, carrying their secrets across the Atlantic. Wherever they went, the question remains: what were they protecting? The conventional view is that it was simply material treasure, but what if it was knowledge, specifically knowledge about the Merovingian bloodline and its divine origins? The Templars' own symbols hint at such a connection. The famous Templar seal showing two knights riding a single horse has been interpreted by some as representing the dual nature of Christ, both divine and human, or alternatively, the dual origin of the Merovingian bloodline from both human and divine fathers. The Red Cross of the Templars, meanwhile, has connections to older solar symbols associated with divine kingship. And perhaps most tellingly, many Templar churches and preceptories were built with specific astronomical alignments that echo the sacred geometry found in Merovingian construction. It's as if they were continuing a tradition that began with the long-haired kings centuries earlier, a tradition of encoding sacred knowledge in architecture itself. This brings us to the mysterious Church of Mary Magdalene in Reims-le-Château, the same church where Berenger Saunière made his mysterious discovery. The church sits at the heart of an area once ruled by the Visigoths, the Germanic people who intermarried with the Merovingians and who were known for their preservation of ancient knowledge. The region is also famous for having been a stronghold of the Cathars, a Gnostic sect brutally suppressed by the Albigensian Crusade in the 13th century. The Cathars believed in a form of Christianity radically different from Roman Catholicism. They saw the material world as corrupt, created by a false god, while the true divine spark resided within humans themselves. They rejected the authority of the church, practiced equality between men and women, and allegedly preserved ancient knowledge from the East. Some scholars have suggested that the Cathars were guardians of secrets related to the Merovingian bloodline, secrets that the church was determined to eradicate. When the last Cathar stronghold fell at Montségur in 1244, legend has it that 4 Cathar perfects escaped the night before the surrender, carrying with them the Cathar treasure. Most historians assume this was material wealth, but what if it was knowledge? What if it was evidence of the Merovingian claim to divine descent? And what if this treasure eventually found its way to Rennes-le-Château, where Saunière would discover it centuries later? The connections between the Merovingians, the Templars, and the Cathars form a web of esoteric knowledge that stretches across centuries of European history. At the heart of this web is a simple but profound question. What if the divine isn't something distant and unreachable, but something that flows through human bloodlines? What if the sacred isn't just found in churches and rituals, but in the very DNA of certain lineages? This idea, the concept of sacred blood, is one that appears in cultures around the world. From the pharaohs of Egypt, who claim descent from the gods, to the emperors of Japan who trace their lineage back to the sun goddess Amaterasu, to the Inca kings who were believed to be the children of the sun. The notion that certain bloodlines carry divine essence is nearly universal. The Merovingians were part of this ancient tradition, claiming a sacred status that set them apart from ordinary humans. But what made the Merovingian claim particularly explosive was its connection to Christianity. If the Merovingians truly believed themselves to be descendants of Christ, they were proposing a Christianity fundamentally different from the one promoted by the Church, a Christianity based not on faith alone, but on blood, on direct physical descent from the divine. Such a belief would undermine the Church's position as the sole intermediary between humanity and God, replacing it with the idea that divinity could be inherited, passed down through generations. This concept of divine bloodlines leads us to one of the most persistent symbols associated with the Merovingians, and later the Templars, the pentagram, today often associated with occultism. The 5-pointed star was for the Merovingians a symbol of sacred geometry, representing the divine proportion found throughout nature. It was also significantly associated with Venus, whose orbit traces a perfect pentagram in the night sky over an 8-year cycle. Venus, the morning and evening star, has long been associated with both Lucifer, the light-bringer, and Christ in various mystical traditions. For the Merovingians, this dual symbolism wasn't contradictory, but complementary, representing the union of opposites, the merging of human and divine. The pentagram appears in Merovingian art and architecture, often hidden within designs that appear conventional at first glance. This leads us to another crucial aspect of the Merovingian legacy, their mastery of sacred geometry and astronomical alignment. The churches and cathedrals built during the Merovingian era and the early medieval period that followed often incorporated precise mathematical ratios and alignments with celestial events. These weren't just decorative choices, but encoded knowledge, a way of preserving ancient wisdom in stone when written records were scarce and dangerous to possess. Take, for example, the mysterious towers built during the Merovingian era in the Languedoc region of southern France. These structures, often octagonal in shape, align with solar and stellar events throughout the year. They form a vast geometric pattern across the landscape, visible only when mapped from above, a technology that wouldn't be available for over 1,000 years after their construction. How did the builders achieve such precision? And more importantly, why? What knowledge were they preserving in these stone markers? One theory suggests these alignments were a way of mapping sacred power lines across the landscape, what later traditions would call ley lines or dragon paths. The Merovingians, with their connection to older pagan traditions, would have understood the concept of earth energy, the idea that certain places were naturally more powerful than others due to geological and electromagnetic factors. By building on these power points and creating alignments between them, they were essentially creating a grid of sacred power across their kingdom. This brings us to the concept of sacred kingship itself, the idea that the king's body was literally connected to the land. In ancient Celtic tradition, the king would symbolically marry the land goddess, becoming the conduit through which her fertility and bounty would flow. If the king was healthy and righteous, the land would prosper. If he was corrupt or ill, the land would suffer. This idea didn't disappear with the coming of Christianity, but was adapted and preserved, particularly in regions like Merovingian Gaul, where Celtic traditions remained strong beneath the Christian veneer. The Merovingians, with their claims of sacred blood and healing powers, were the embodiment of this ancient concept of sacred kingship. Their long hair, never cut from birth, symbolized their unbroken connection to the wild, generative powers of nature. Their touch could heal the sick because they themselves were conduits for divine energy. They weren't just political rulers, but cosmic ones, maintaining the balance between heaven and earth through their very existence. This concept helps explain why the later Frankish historians, writing after the Carolingian usurpation, portrayed the late Merovingian kings as do-nothing kings who were merely figureheads. From a purely political perspective, these kings may indeed have delegated much of their administrative authority to the mayors of the palace. But from a sacred perspective, their true function wasn't to govern in the ordinary sense, but to exist as living embodiments of the divine on earth, their very presence ensuring cosmic harmony. When Pepin the Short overthrew the last Merovingian king with papal blessing in 751 CE, he wasn't just changing political dynasties, he was fundamentally altering the nature of kingship itself. The Carolingians, lacking the sacred blood of the Merovingians, had to base their authority on church approval rather than inherent divine right. This marked a profound shift in European history, one that would eventually lead to the concept of the divine right of kings, as understood in the late medieval and early modern periods, not a right based on blood, but on church sanction. But what if this shift wasn't as complete as official history suggests? What if the Merovingian bloodline didn't disappear but went underground, preserved by those who understood its true significance? The persistent legends of surviving Merovingian descendants, the mysterious activities of the Templars, the strange symbolism found in churches like Rennes-le-Château, all hint at a hidden history, a counter-narrative to the official story of European Christianity. This brings us to perhaps the most famous symbol associated with the Merovingians and the mysteries that surround them, the Holy Grail. In popular culture, the Grail is usually depicted as the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, later used to catch his blood during the crucifixion. But in the earliest Grail romances, written in the 12th and 13th centuries during the height of Templar power, the Grail is described in much more ambiguous terms, sometimes as a cup, but also as a stone, a dish, or even a person. The word Grail itself may derive from saying rail or saying rail, royal blood, suggesting that the true Grail isn't an object at all, but a bloodline. The Grail romances, with their knights questing for a mysterious object that gives eternal life and happiness, may be coded narratives about the search for the lost Merovingian bloodline, the descendants of Christ who carried divine blood in their veins. These romances emerged at a time when direct discussion of such ideas would have been dangerously heretical. By cloaking their true meaning in allegory and chivalric adventure, the authors could preserve and transmit forbidden knowledge without risking church persecution. The Fisher King of Grail legend, wounded in the thigh or groin and presiding over a wasteland that can only be healed when the right question is asked, bears striking parallels to the declining Merovingian dynasty, a sacred bloodline whose power was waning but might one day be restored. The quest for the Grail, then, can be seen as the search for the lost descendants of the divine bloodline, a search that may have been the true mission of the Knights Templar. During their excavations beneath the Temple Mount, did the Templars find evidence confirming the Merovingian claim of descent from Christ? Did they discover ancient texts or artifacts that revealed a history of Christianity fundamentally different from the one taught by the Church? We may never know exactly what the Templars found, but their subsequent actions suggest they discovered something profound. Their rapid accumulation of wealth and power, their creation of a vast network across Europe, their development of coded communication systems, all point to an organization with a mission far beyond the protection of pilgrims. They were building an infrastructure for preserving and transmitting secret knowledge, creating a parallel power structure outside the control of both church and crown. The sudden suppression of the Templars in 1307 didn't just eliminate a wealthy military order, it struck at the heart of this parallel structure. But as we've seen, there are numerous indications that the Templars anticipated the attack and managed to preserve both their treasure and their knowledge. The question is, where did this knowledge go? Who became the new guardians of the secret? Some researchers point to the emergence of Freemasonry in the centuries following the Templar suppression. While Masonic lodges didn't appear officially until the 17th century, there are hints of earlier proto-Masonic groups operating in secrecy, particularly in Scotland, where many Templars allegedly fled. The Masonic emphasis on symbolic knowledge, sacred geometry, and the building arts echoes Templar and ultimately Merovingian priorities. The Freemasons, with their complex symbolic system, and their emphasis on the Temple of Solomon, may have been preserving aspects of the knowledge that the Templars had discovered beneath the original temple. Their rituals, particularly those of the higher degrees, contain elements that some researchers interpret as references to a hidden royal bloodline, the same bloodline that the Merovingians claimed and that the Templars may have discovered evidence for. But the story doesn't end with the Freemasons. Throughout European history, various esoteric groups have emerged, claiming access to secret knowledge about humanity's true spiritual heritage. The Rosicrucians of the 17th century, the Martinists of the 18th, the Theosophists of the 19th, all promoted ideas that challenged orthodox religious understanding, often suggesting that the divine was something that could be directly experienced rather than merely worshipped from afar. Many of these groups incorporated symbols and concepts associated with the Merovingians and Templars, the rose and the cross, the concept of sacred bloodlines, the importance of Mary Magdalene as a carrier of secret knowledge. Were they preserving fragments of the original Merovingian wisdom, keeping alive a tradition that official history had tried to erase? This brings us back to Rennes-le-Château and the strange discoveries of Bérenger Saunière in the late 19th century. Whatever Saunière found in his church, whether documents, artifacts, or something else entirely, it connected him to powerful forces that transformed him from a poor parish priest to a man of considerable wealth and influence. The church he renovated is filled with clues that point to the same complex of ideas we've been exploring: sacred bloodlines, hidden knowledge, and a version of Christianity quite different from the Orthodox. One of the most striking elements in Saunière's renovated church is a statue of the demon Asmodeus, traditionally associated with lust and anger, holding up the holy water font at the entrance. Why would a Catholic priest place such an image in his church? Some researchers suggest it's because Asmodeus in certain esoteric traditions is not a demon at all, but a guardian of Solomon's temple, the same temple beneath which the Templars conducted their excavations. The church also features unusual depictions of the Stations of the Cross, with symbolic elements that don't appear in standard versions. Station 14, which traditionally shows Christ being laid in the tomb, instead shows people carrying a body away at night by the light of the full moon, an image some interpret as representing the secret removal of Christ's body, suggesting he didn't die on the cross as official doctrine maintains. Perhaps most significantly, the church gives unusual prominence to Mary Magdalene, who according to some traditions was not just a follower of Christ, but his wife and the mother of his children. She is depicted with a skull at her feet, a Veneta symbol traditionally representing the transience of earthly life, but also possibly a reference to Golgotha, the place of the skull where Christ was crucified. The mystery of Rennes Chateau has attracted researchers, treasure hunters, and conspiracy theorists for decades. Some dismiss the whole affair as an elaborate hoax or, at best, a case of a priest who discovered old church treasure and spent it on renovations. But the symbolic elements Saunière incorporated into his church are too precise, too consistent with the broader complex of ideas surrounding the Merovingians and Templars, to be easily dismissed. What if Saunière really did discover evidence connecting the region to the surviving Merovingian bloodline? The area around Rennes-le-Château was historically ruled by the Visigoths, who intermarried with the Merovingians and who are known to have brought substantial treasure with them when they settled in southern France, including items allegedly taken from the temple in Jerusalem when Rome sacked the city in 70 CE. This connection between the Visigoths, the Merovingians, and the temple treasure adds another layer to our unfolding mystery. If the Visigoths possessed artifacts from the temple, might these have included evidence pertaining to Christ's life and bloodline? Might such evidence have later come into possession of the Merovingian kings through intermarriage, becoming part of the secret knowledge that made their bloodline sacred? And here's where we come to perhaps the most explosive theory of all. What if Christ himself was connected to a royal bloodline, not just through his descent from King David, as the Gospels claim, but through other royal lines as well? Some researchers have suggested that the wedding at Cana, where Christ performed his first miracle of turning water into wine, was actually his own wedding to Mary Magdalene, who came from a royal line herself. If Christ married and had children, and if those children and their descendants intermarried with the Merovingian line, it would explain why the Merovingians were so insistent on their sacred status. They wouldn't just be kings with divine favor. They would be the literal blood descendants of Christ himself, carrying in their veins the bloodline of the divine made flesh. This theory, popularized by books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and later fictionalized in the Da Vinci Code, remains highly controversial and is rejected by mainstream historians and theologians. But what's undeniable is that beliefs about sacred bloodlines and hidden Christian knowledge have persisted throughout European history, often preserved by secret societies and esoteric groups operating on the margins of official religion and politics. Whether or not the Merovingians really were descendants of Christ, they clearly saw themselves as set apart by their blood, as carriers of a sacred heritage that made them fundamentally different from ordinary humans. This belief didn't disappear with the fall of their dynasty, but continued to influence European history through the Templars, the Cathars, the Freemasons, and other groups that preserved aspects of this alternative spiritual tradition. The story of the Merovingians is more than just a fascinating historical mystery. It's a window into an entirely different way of understanding spirituality and humanity's relationship to the divine. It suggests that the sacred isn't just something to be worshipped from afar, but something that can flow through human bloodlines, that can be inherited and passed down through generations. It proposes a Christianity not of faith alone, but of blood and direct descent. Such ideas challenge our conventional understanding of religion and spirituality. They suggest that the divine isn't separate from humanity, but intimately connected to it, not just through spiritual practice, but through physical descent. They propose that certain lineages carry special properties, special responsibilities, special connections to the cosmic order. In our modern, egalitarian age, such notions of sacred bloodlines may seem archaic or even offensive. We prefer to believe that all humans are created equal, that spiritual enlightenment is available to anyone regardless of birth. But throughout most of human history, the idea of sacred kingship, a bloodline specially connected to the divine, was the norm rather than the exception. The Merovingians, with their long hair and healing touch, their strange burials, and their claims of dual paternity, represent one of the last expressions of this ancient tradition in Western Europe. They stood at the crossroads between the old pagan understanding of sacred kingship and the new Christian conception of divine authority mediated through the church. In their unique synthesis of these traditions, they created something powerful enough that its echoes still resonate today, 15 centuries after their dynasty fell from power. As we conclude our exploration of the Merovingian Code, one question remains: does the bloodline still exist? Are there people walking among us today who carry the sacred blood of the long-haired kings, perhaps even the blood of Christ himself? The legends of surviving Merovingian descendants have never died out, with various noble families of Europe claiming connection to the ancient dynasty. The House of Lorraine, the Habsburgs, the Stuarts of Scotland, all have at various times been associated with Merovingian descent. More recently, figures like Pierre Plantard claim direct lineage from Dagobert II through a hidden line of descent preserved by secret societies like the Priory of Sion. While Plantard's specific claims have been largely debunked, the persistence of such stories speaks to our enduring fascination with the idea of sacred bloodlines surviving into the modern world. Perhaps the true legacy of the Merovingians isn't biological but spiritual, not a literal bloodline, but a tradition of esoteric knowledge preserved through the centuries by those who understood its significance. The sacred geometry encoded in cathedral architecture, the symbolic systems of groups like the Freemasons, the persistent legends of the Holy Grail, all may be manifestations of this hidden stream of wisdom flowing beneath the surface of official history. Or perhaps, somewhere in the world today, descendants of the long-haired kings still exist, still carrying in their veins the blood that was once believed to be touched by the divine. Perhaps they still guard the secret knowledge that made their ancestors both revered and feared, the knowledge of humanity's true relationship to the divine, of bloodlines that bridge the gap between heaven and earth. The mystery of the Merovingians reminds us that history isn't just a sequence of events, but a complex tapestry of beliefs, symbols, and hidden influences. Beneath the official narrative of kings and battles, popes and emperors, runs a deeper current of esoteric knowledge and spiritual understanding, preserved not in official records but in symbols, legends, and secret traditions. As we navigate our own complex times with their own challenges and mysteries, perhaps we can draw inspiration from the enduring legacy of the Merovingian kings, not necessarily from their claims of sacred blood, but from their synthesis of traditions, their preservation of ancient wisdom, their understanding that the divine isn't distant and unreachable, but present in the very fabric of human existence. The code of the Merovingians, if such a thing ever existed, wouldn't have been just a secret to be guarded, but a wisdom to be lived, an understanding of humanity's place in the cosmic order that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality, between history and myth. In that sense, perhaps the true code of the Merovingians isn't lost at all, but waiting to be rediscovered by those with eyes to see and ears to hear. A wisdom as relevant today as it was 15 centuries ago, when the long-haired kings ruled what would become France. As you sit there, contemplating these ancient mysteries, consider this: what if the divine bloodline isn't something exclusive to one royal dynasty, but something we all share in different ways? What if the real secret of the Merovingians was not that they alone carried sacred blood, but that they recognized the sacred potential in all human bloodlines, the divine spark that animates every human being regardless of birth or station? In that light, perhaps the most powerful legacy of the Merovingian code is the reminder that the sacred isn't found only in churches or holy books, but in the very blood that flows through our veins, connecting us to all our ancestors, stretching back to the beginning of human existence, and perhaps to something even more profound, a divine source that transcends human understanding. The next time you visit an ancient cathedral, look beyond the conventional religious symbolism to the sacred geometry encoded in its architecture. The next time you encounter a strange symbol or legend, consider what hidden knowledge it might preserve. And the next time you ponder the great mysteries of existence, remember the long-haired kings who ruled through sacred blood rather than mere political power, and the possibility that their legacy lives on in ways we're only beginning to understand. The code of the Merovingians remains unbroken, not because it's too complex to decipher, but because we've been looking for it in the wrong places. It's not hidden in some dusty manuscript or buried treasure, but encoded in the very structure of reality itself, in the mathematical proportions that govern the cosmos, in the cycles of the planets and stars, in the double helix of DNA that carries our genetic heritage. Perhaps that's the ultimate message of the Merovingian mystery, that the divine isn't separate from the material world, but intrinsic to it, that the sacred isn't distinct from the profane, but interpenetrates it at every level. In a world increasingly dominated by materialistic thinking, such a perspective offers a profound alternative, a way of seeing reality as simultaneously physical and spiritual, scientific and mystical. As we conclude our journey through the shadowy world of the Merovingian dynasty, remember that the greatest mysteries are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to develop eyes that can truly see them. The code of the long-haired kings may be more accessible than we imagine, not locked away in secret vaults, but written in the stars above us, in the patterns of nature around us, and in the blood that flows through our own veins. But now let's turn our attention to some of the specific rulers who embodied this extraordinary dynasty, kings, whose lives were so wrapped in legend that it's hard to tell where history ends and myth begins. Perhaps the most fascinating is Childeric IV, whose tomb was discovered in 1653 in present-day Belgium. What archaeologists found wasn't just a king's burial, but a time capsule of Merovingian mystery. Alongside the king's remains were over 300 golden bees, a crystal ball, a severed horse's head, and numerous magical talismans that defied easy categorization. The golden bees in particular have fascinated researchers for centuries. These weren't just decorative items, but symbols of immortality and resurrection, connecting the Merovingians to ancient Egyptian traditions, where bees represented the soul's journey to the afterlife. Napoleon was so impressed by the symbolism that he adopted the Merovingian bees for his own imperial regalia, literally cloaking himself in the symbols of the ancient sacred kings. Childric's son, Clovis I, would become the dynasty's most famous ruler, uniting most of Gaul under Merovingian rule, and converting to Christianity around 496 CE. But even this conversion story is shrouded in mystical elements. According to the traditional account, Clovis called upon Christ during a desperate battle against the Alemanni, promising to convert if granted victory. When the tide of battle miraculously turned in his favor, Clovis kept his promise. But there's more to this story than a simple battlefield conversion. The ceremony of Clovis's baptism, as described by Gregory of Tours, was filled with supernatural elements. As Clovis entered the baptismal font, a dove descended from heaven, carrying a vial of holy oil that would be used to anoint him. This holy ampilla would supposedly be preserved and used to anoint French kings for centuries afterward, creating a direct spiritual link between the Merovingian kings and their successors. Yet despite embracing Christianity, Clovis never fully abandoned the old ways. He continued to wear his hair long in the Merovingian tradition, maintaining that vital connection to the supernatural powers that legitimized his rule. And the Christianity he embraced wasn't quite the orthodox version promoted by Rome. It contained elements of Arianism, a belief that Christ was distinct from and subordinate to God the Father, along with strands of older pagan traditions that emphasized direct spiritual experience over church hierarchy. Then there's the enigmatic figure of Dagobert II, whose assassination in 679 CE marks a critical turning point in the Merovingian story. Dagobert had spent years in exile in Ireland and Britain, regions where Celtic Christianity, with its emphasis on direct spiritual connection and its unique perspectives on Mary Magdalene, still flourished. When he returned to claim his throne, he brought with him not just political ambitions, but a potentially dangerous spiritual perspective. Dagobert married a Visigothic princess named Giselle de Razès, connecting the Merovingian line to the region that would later become famous for Rennes-le Château and its mysteries. Their son, Sigisbert of V, disappears from official history after his father's assassination. But what if he didn't die? What if he escaped to his mother's homeland in what is now southern France, preserving the bloodline in secret? This brings us to one of the most tantalizing aspects of the Merovingian mystery, the possibility that their bloodline didn't end with the official fall of the dynasty, but continued underground, protected by those who understood its significance. Various noble families throughout European history have claimed Merovingian descent, from the House of Lorraine to the Habsburgs to the Stuarts of Scotland. Even more intriguing are the commoners who have occasionally emerged claiming Merovingian heritage. In the small villages of southern France, particularly in the region around Rennes-le-Château, local families have preserved oral traditions suggesting their descent from the forgotten children of Dagobert II or other Merovingian kings. These aren't wealthy nobles seeking to enhance their status, but ordinary people preserving an extraordinary heritage. The physical traits associated with the Merovingians occasionally resurface as well. Individuals born with a distinctive red birthmark, shaped like a cross between their shoulder blades, a feature mentioned in ancient texts as the mark of the sacred king. Medical science might dismiss such birthmarks as coincidence, but in the realm of sacred bloodlines, there are no coincidences, only signs for those who know how to read them. Then there's the mysterious skull of Dagobert II, allegedly preserved in secret for centuries and now kept in a church in Stenay, France. Forensic examination of the skull shows a wound consistent with the historical accounts of his assassination, a blow to the head while hunting in the Ardennes forest. But more intriguingly, the skull displays unusual physical characteristics, including an abnormally high forehead and a cranial capacity significantly larger than average. Some researchers have suggested these unusual features might be evidence of the elongated skull phenomenon found in certain ancient royal lineages around the world, from Egypt to Peru. These distinctive skull shapes, often achieved through intentional cranial deformation in childhood, were markers of royal or sacred status in many ancient cultures. But what if, in the case of the Merovingians, it wasn't artificial deformation, but a genuine genetic trait, physical evidence of their claimed otherworldly origin? The Merovingian physical distinctiveness didn't end with their skulls. Historical accounts describe these kings as unusually tall for their era, often standing a full head above their contemporaries. They were frequently noted to have penetrating eyes of an unusual color, sometimes described as sea green or the color of the ocean on a stormy day, that seemed to look through people rather than at them. These physical peculiarities fed into the belief that the Merovingians weren't fully human, but something more, beings with one foot in this world, and one in the realm of the divine. In an age when physical appearance was often read as an outward sign of inner qualities or spiritual status, the distinctive look of the Merovingian kings would have reinforced their sacred aura. But perhaps the most significant physical feature of all was their famous long hair, which they reportedly never cut from birth. This wasn't just a fashion statement, or even a simple tribal custom, the Merovingian hair was considered the physical manifestation of their connection to supernatural power, the visible sign of their divine status. When enemies sought to depose a Merovingian king, they didn't just remove his crown, they cut his hair, severing his connection to the divine power that legitimized his rule. This connection between hair and supernatural power appears in cultures around the world, from the biblical story of Samson to Norse legends of magical hair. But for the Merovingians, it wasn't just symbolic. Their hair was believed to be literally charged with sacred energy, a kind of spiritual antenna connecting them to divine realms. Witnesses describe the hair of Merovingian kings as unusually thick and lustrous, sometimes with a slight reddish or golden hue, regardless of the king's primary hair color. It was said to move slightly, even when there was no breeze, as if stirred by unseen energies. Some accounts even claim that in moments of strong emotion or spiritual significance, the king's hair would seem to glow with an inner light, creating a halo-like effect around his head. The Merovingian kings employed special servants, whose sole duty was the care of the royal hair. These weren't mere barbers but priest-like figures who used sacred oils and performed ritualistic combing ceremonies, believed to channel and amplify the divine energies flowing through the king's locks. The combs used in these ceremonies, often made of gold and engraved with mysterious symbols, have been found in Merovingian royal tombs, testifying to their significance. This brings us to another fascinating aspect of Merovingian rule, their mastery of what we might today call subtle energy or bioelectricity. The Merovingian healing touch, their ability to cure diseases like scrofula with a simple laying on of hands, wasn't viewed as miraculous in the conventional religious sense, but as a natural manifestation of the special energy they carried in their blood and hair. The Merovingians understood something that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. The human body is not just a biochemical machine, but an electromagnetic system capable of influencing its surroundings in subtle but measurable ways. The long hair of the Merovingian kings, never cut from birth, might have actually served as a kind of natural antenna, enhancing their body's natural electromagnetic field and their sensitivity to environmental energies. Recent scientific research has shown that hair does indeed conduct electromagnetic energy and can affect the body's electrical field. The traditional yogic understanding that long hair enhances intuition and spiritual awareness, long dismissed as superstition by Western science, is gaining new credibility in light of these discoveries. Perhaps the Merovingians, drawing on ancient wisdom traditions, understood this principle centuries before modern science could confirm it. This understanding of subtle energy extends to the Merovingian approach to governance and land management. Historical records show that Merovingian kings would personally walk the boundaries of their territories at specific times of year, usually around the solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't just a ceremonial procession, but what we might now call a geomantic practice, a way of harmonizing the energy of the land with that of the king's body. The routes of these processions weren't arbitrary, but followed specific paths that connected natural power spots, sacred springs, unusual rock formations, ancient megalithic sites. By walking these paths at astronomically significant times, the Merovingian kings were effectively activating networks of earth energy, creating what later esoteric traditions would call living landscapes, regions where the natural energy of the earth was enhanced and harmonized for the benefit of all living things. This sophisticated understanding of land energy would later influence the placement of Gothic cathedrals, many of which were built on sites originally consecrated during the Merovingian era. The great cathedral complexes of France, with their precise astronomical alignments and sacred geometry, can be seen as stone embodiments of the energy work that the Merovingian kings once performed with their own bodies. But the Merovingians didn't just work with the energies of the land, they also understood the power of symbols to shape consciousness. Merovingian art and architecture is filled with cryptic symbols that operate on multiple levels simultaneously, conveying different meanings to viewers of different levels of initiation: the equal-armed cross, the bee, the fleur-de-lis, the double-headed eagle. These and other symbols formed a complex visual language that encoded the Merovingian worldview. Take the fleur-de-lis, for example, the stylized lily that would later become synonymous with French royalty. On its most basic level, it represents the lily flower, a symbol of purity. But in Merovingian usage, it was also a stylized bee seen from above, connecting it to the golden bees found in Childeric's tomb. And for those with deeper knowledge, it represented the trident of Neptune, a reference to the sea god who, according to legend, fathered Merovech with a human queen. This multi-layered approach to symbolism is characteristic of esoteric traditions throughout history, where surface meanings conceal deeper truths accessible only to initiates. The Merovingians weren't just using symbols as decoration or even as simple political emblems. They were employing them as tools for preserving and transmitting complex metaphysical concepts across generations. This brings us to another crucial aspect of the Merovingian legacy, their relationship to what would later be called alchemy. Not the simplistic lead into gold concept of popular imagination, but the sophisticated spiritual science aimed at transforming consciousness itself. The Merovingians, drawing on ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Middle Eastern wisdom traditions, practiced a form of royal alchemy where the king's body itself was the prima materia to be transformed. The famous Merovingian healing touch wasn't just a miraculous gift, but the result of specific alchemical practices designed to refine the king's subtle energies. Through carefully regulated diet, specialized breathing techniques, and exposure to specific mineral and herbal preparations, the Merovingian kings systematically transformed their physical bodies into conduits for healing energy. Archaeological excavations of Merovingian royal compounds have uncovered laboratories containing equipment strikingly similar to that used by later medieval alchemists, specialized furnaces, unusual glass vessels, and containers for rare minerals and herbs. These weren't primitive facilities, but sophisticated workspaces, where the royal alchemists performed their transformative arts, preparing medicines and elixirs for the king's use. The legendary longevity of some Merovingian kings, with several supposedly living well into their 90s, in an era when reaching 50 was considered remarkable, may have been connected to these alchemical practices. Historical accounts describe elderly Merovingian kings who maintained the vitality and appearance of men decades younger, with hair that never grayed and skin that remained unwrinkled despite their advanced years. This apparent mastery of physical aging connects the Merovingians to other legendary traditions of exceptionally long-lived rulers, from the ancient Chinese emperors who sought the elixir of immortality to the mysterious Fisher Kings of Grail legend who lived for centuries while appearing neither young nor old. It suggests sophisticated understanding of human physiology and biochemistry far beyond what conventional history credits to early medieval Europe. But the most profound aspect of Merovingian alchemy wasn't physical but spiritual, the systematic transformation of consciousness through specific practices and initiations. Historical accounts describe Merovingian kings spending periods of ritual seclusion in special chambers built beneath their palaces or in remote forest locations. These weren't mere retreats, but intensive spiritual practices where the king would undergo experiences designed to expand his awareness beyond ordinary human limits. One such practice, hinted at in fragmentary texts and archaeological evidence, involved a form of sensory deprivation combined with the use of certain psychoactive substances derived from ergot and other fungal sources. The king would lie in complete darkness for 3 days, symbolically mirroring Christ's time in the tomb, while consuming preparations designed to induce visionary states. Upon emerging, he would be considered spiritually reborn, with enhanced insight and supernatural awareness. These practices have parallels in shamanic traditions around the world, where ritual death and rebirth are central to the development of spiritual power. But the Merovingians integrated these ancient techniques with emerging Christian symbolism, creating a unique synthesis that allowed them to maintain older wisdom traditions while outwardly embracing the new faith. This synthetic approach extended to the Merovingian understanding of sacred texts. While officially Christian, the Merovingian court maintained scholars who studied not just the Bible but the Hermetic texts, Gnostic Gospels, and other esoteric writings from across the Mediterranean world. They understood these diverse traditions not as contradictory, but as different expressions of universal principles that transcended any single religious framework. This inclusive approach to spiritual wisdom would later influence esoteric movements throughout European history, from the Cathars and Templars to the Renaissance Hermeticists, and eventually the Rosicrucians and Freemasons. All these movements share the Merovingian perspective that truth isn't confined to any single tradition, but can be found in the harmonization of diverse wisdom streams. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of Merovingian spiritual practice was their apparent belief in the divine feminine as equal to the divine masculine. Unlike the increasingly patriarchal Christianity of Rome, the Merovingian court honored female spiritual power, maintaining priestesses alongside priests and celebrating festivals dedicated to Mary Magdalene with particular devotion. Archaeological evidence from Merovingian royal compounds shows chapels dedicated to Mary Magdalene that were equal in size and grandeur to those dedicated to Christ, suggesting that in Merovingian spirituality, the Magdalene was not just a follower of Christ, but his equal partner. Some researchers have suggested that the Merovingians viewed Christ and Magdalene as the embodiment of divine masculine and feminine principles, whose union, both spiritual and physical, was essential for cosmic harmony. This brings us back to the explosive theory that the Merovingians believed themselves to be descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene. If Christ represented the divine masculine and Magdalene the divine feminine, then their union would produce offspring who carried both principles in balance. Sacred children whose bloodline would be uniquely qualified to maintain harmony between heaven and earth through their very existence. Such a belief would explain the Merovingian insistence on their sacred blood, their healing powers, and their role as mediators between the divine and human realms. It would also explain why such a belief had to be carefully guarded. It directly challenged the Church's position that Christ never married or had children, a doctrine essential to establishing ecclesiastical authority as the sole mediator between humanity and God. If Christ had descendants, those descendants, not the Church, would be his true representatives on earth. Their blood, not the apostolic succession of the papacy, would carry his authentic legacy. Such a belief would be more than heretical. It would undermine the very foundations of church power and legitimacy. This helps explain why the Merovingian dynasty was systematically erased from mainstream historical consciousness. After their deposition by the Carolingians with papal blessing, a concerted effort was made to minimize their significance, to portray them as merely one among many barbarian dynasties rather than the carriers of a profound spiritual legacy that challenged ecclesiastical authority. But the memory of the long-haired kings couldn't be entirely suppressed. It went underground, preserved in folk traditions, in the symbols encoded in cathedral architecture, in the esoteric teachings of secret societies, and perhaps most significantly, in the bloodlines of families who maintain their Merovingian heritage in secret across the centuries. This brings us to the present day and the enduring fascination with the Merovingian mystery. In recent decades, books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, The Da Vinci Code, and numerous others have brought aspects of the Merovingian story to mainstream attention. While these popular treatments often simplify complex historical and spiritual concepts, they've succeeded in reawakening interest in questions that had been deliberately buried for centuries. Modern researchers, armed with advanced technologies and methodologies unknown to previous generations, are taking fresh looks at Merovingian artifacts, burial sites, and architectural remains. DNA analysis of remains from Merovingian tombs has revealed surprising genetic markers that don't fit neatly into the expected patterns of early medieval European populations. Suggestions of Middle Eastern, North African, and even more distant genetic influences that raise intriguing questions about the true origins of the dynasty. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of sites associated with the Merovingians have revealed hidden chambers, tunnels, and structures that don't appear in any historical records. Particularly significant are the discoveries beneath certain churches in southern France, where complex underground structures, some apparently designed for initiatory rituals, have been found dating to the Merovingian era. These discoveries suggest that there's still much to learn about the Merovingians and their legacy. The conventional historical narrative, which portrays them as simply one among many post-Roman dynasties, increasingly appears inadequate to explain the sophistication of their cultural, spiritual, and scientific achievements. Something more was happening in Merovingian Gaul than the simple transfer of political power from Roman to Germanic hands. But perhaps the most significant modern development in the Merovingian mystery is the emergence of individuals and groups claiming to represent the continuing tradition of Merovingian wisdom. Some of these claims are undoubtedly spurious, products of wishful thinking or deliberate deception, but others display knowledge of Merovingian symbols, practices, and beliefs so arcane and specific that they're difficult to dismiss entirely. In the forests of southern France, in the shadow of ancient castles and remote churches, gatherings still take place where participants claim to preserve the authentic spiritual practices of the Merovingian court. These aren't public events, but private ceremonies conducted away from curious eyes, accessible only to those who can demonstrate specific knowledge or, more intriguingly, specific genetic markers allegedly associated with Merovingian descent. Reports from those who have witnessed these gatherings describe ceremonies involving sacred oils, specialized breathing techniques, and the ritualistic combing of hair, all elements associated with historical accounts of Merovingian practice. Participants reportedly experience unusual physical and psychological effects, including altered perception, enhanced intuition, and in some cases, spontaneous healing abilities temporarily similar to the famous Merovingian touch. More mainstream manifestations of continuing Merovingian influence can be seen in certain branches of Freemasonry, particularly those associated with the Scottish Rite and its higher degrees. The symbolism used in these initiatory systems contains numerous elements that can be traced back to Merovingian sources: the bee, the equal-armed cross, the fleur-de-lis, and others. The ritual dramas enacted in these degrees often contain veiled references to sacred bloodlines and hidden wisdom preserved across generations. Even in popular culture, the Merovingian influence continues to surface in unexpected ways. From the mysterious character called the Merovingian in the Matrix film series, to the countless novels, games, and artworks inspired by concepts of sacred bloodlines and hidden history, the legacy of the long-haired kings persists in the collective imagination. These aren't merely entertainments, but modern mythologies that keep ancient questions alive in contemporary consciousness. This brings us back to the fundamental question at the heart of the Merovingian mystery. What if divine essence isn't something distant and separate from humanity, but something that can flow through human bloodlines? What if certain lineages, through either spiritual practice or direct descent, carry special qualities that connect them more directly to the source of all being? Such questions challenge not just religious orthodoxy but modern materialistic thinking as well. They suggest that there's more to human inheritance than can be explained by conventional genetics, that spiritual qualities can be transmitted across generations through means we don't yet fully understand. They propose that the sacred isn't just a matter of belief, but of blood, of direct physical connection to divine sources. In an age increasingly dominated by technological thinking and digital abstraction, the Merovingian mystery offers a radical alternative. A vision of spirituality rooted in the physical body, in the land, in the direct experience of subtle energies that connect all living things. It reminds us that before religion became a matter of abstract theology and institutional power, it was about direct connection to divine forces made manifest in the natural world. Perhaps this is why the Merovingian legacy remains so compelling, centuries after the dynasty's fall from power. In a world where people increasingly hunger for authentic spiritual experience beyond the confines of conventional religion, the vision of sacred kingship, of divine power, made manifest in human form, speaks to a deep longing for direct connection to the sacred. The Merovingians, with their long hair and healing touch, their alchemical practices, and their reverence for the divine feminine, represent a road not taken in Western spiritual development, a path where Christianity might have evolved not as an institutional religion, but as a living tradition of embodied spiritual practice, where the divine was understood not as distant and transcendent, but as immanent in human blood and flesh. As we conclude our exploration of the Merovingian code, we're left not with definitive answers, but with profound questions that continue to resonate across the centuries. Did the Merovingians truly carry divine blood in their veins? Did their dynasty preserve an understanding of Christianity fundamentally different from the one that would become orthodox? Does their bloodline continue to this day, carrying forward an ancient spiritual heritage in secret? These questions may never be fully answered to everyone's satisfaction, but perhaps that's appropriate for a mystery of this magnitude. Some truths aren't meant to be proven through external evidence, but experienced directly by those prepared to receive them. The Merovingian legacy may be less about historical facts than about the possibilities they open in our understanding of human potential and our relationship to the divine. In that spirit, I invite you to consider the Merovingian mystery, not just as a fascinating historical puzzle, but as a doorway to deeper questions about your own spiritual heritage, your own connection to the sacred, your own potential for direct experience of the divine. The long-haired kings may be figures from the distant past, but the questions they raise about humanity's relationship to the sacred remain eternally relevant. Now let's dive deeper into perhaps the most tantalizing aspect of the Merovingian mystery, their legendary treasure. We're not talking about mere gold and jewels, though those were certainly part of it. We're talking about artifacts of immense spiritual and historical significance, objects that may have changed the course of Western civilization had they remained in public view rather than disappearing into the shadows of secret history. The most famous component of this treasure is what later tradition would call the Holy Grail. But for the Merovingians, the Grail wasn't necessarily a cup. It was something far more profound, possibly a collection of sacred texts documenting Christ's bloodline, or perhaps a series of artifacts from the Jerusalem temple that proved his royal heritage. Some researchers have even suggested it might have been something as scientifically significant as a preserved DNA sample, though how such a thing could have been maintained with early medieval technology remains a matter of speculation. Whatever its exact nature, the Merovingian Grail treasure was reportedly kept in a specially constructed chamber beneath the royal palace at Stenay, in present-day France. This subterranean vault, accessible only through a series of hidden passages and protected by both physical and what we might call energetic security measures, served as the dynasty's most sacred space, a place where the king would commune directly with the divine forces that legitimized his rule. Archaeological excavations in the region have uncovered tantalizing hints of this hidden chamber, including unusual electromagnetic anomalies that defy conventional explanation. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal a large void approximately 40 feet beneath the ruins of the old palace, but attempts to access this space have been consistently blocked by both natural obstacles and, some claim, by political forces, with a vested interest in keeping certain discoveries from public view. What makes the Merovingian treasure particularly significant isn't just its alleged connection to Christ, but its rumored origins in much older traditions. According to esoteric histories preserved by groups like the Priory of Sion, the treasures in the Merovingian vault included artifacts from ancient Egypt, Babylon, and even the legendary civilization of Atlantis, objects of power that had been preserved and passed down through select lineages for thousands of years. These weren't just archaeological curiosities, but tools for accessing and channeling specific energetic frequencies, technologies of consciousness, disguised as religious artifacts to protect them from those who might misuse their power. The Ark of the Covenant, famously lost after the destruction of the Jerusalem Temple, features prominently in these accounts, not as the simple gold-covered chest described in the Bible, but as a sophisticated device for communicating with non-physical realms. According to these esoteric traditions, the Merovingians weren't just guardians of sacred bloodlines, but of sacred technologies, methods for directly accessing and influencing levels of reality beyond ordinary human perception. Their healing abilities, their seemingly uncanny awareness of events happening at great distances, their influence over natural phenomena like weather and crop growth, all these supposedly miraculous powers were the result of systematic techniques preserved from ancient wisdom traditions. This perspective helps explain one of the most persistent legends surrounding the Merovingians, their association with a mysterious substance called Eerie or monatomic gold. First popularized by modern researchers, but allegedly derived from ancient alchemical texts, Eerie is described as a white powder created through specific processing of gold and other precious metals, which produces profound effects on human consciousness when ingested in carefully measured amounts. Archaeological analysis of residue found in certain Merovingian royal tombs has revealed unusual gold compounds that don't match known forms of the metal used in conventional jewelry or decoration. These compounds contain gold in an altered state that modern chemistry struggles to categorize, with atomic structures that seem to defy conventional understanding of how elements should behave. Some researchers have suggested that the Merovingians' seemingly miraculous abilities, their healing touch, their longevity, their reported capacity to influence natural phenomena, might have been connected to ceremonial consumption of these altered metal compounds. The legendary royal jelly fed to Merovingian kings at their coronation and on specific solar festivals throughout the year may have been more than symbolic. It may have been a carefully prepared alchemical substance designed to activate dormant capacities in their already special genetic makeup. This brings us to another controversial aspect of the Merovingian legacy, their possible connection to non-human intelligence. The legend of Merovich's conception by a beast of Neptune has traditionally been interpreted as either pure mythology or as a symbolic way of describing union with a divine force. But some researchers have proposed a more literal interpretation that the Merovingian bloodline may have resulted from actual genetic interchange with entities not of conventional terrestrial origin. As outlandish as this might sound to conventional historical thinking, similar legends of divine or otherworldly parentage appear in royal traditions around the world. From the god-kings of ancient Egypt to the star ancestors of Inca royalty, modern researchers in the field of ancient astronaut theory have suggested that these widespread myths may have roots in actual contact between human populations and advanced non-human intelligences in the distant past. The Merovingian claim of dual paternity, human and divine, might be understood in this context not as mere political propaganda, but as the preservation of an actual genetic memory, a bloodline that carried genetic markers distinct from the surrounding population due to this purported ancient contact. The distinctive physical features attributed to Merovingian kings, unusual height, penetrating eyes of an uncommon color, abnormal cranial capacity, might be interpreted as expressions of this genetic heritage. This perspective places the Merovingian mystery in a much broader context, connecting it to global questions about human origins and the possibility of ancient contact with non-human intelligence. It suggests that what we're dealing with isn't just a medieval dynasty with unusual religious beliefs, but potentially the preserved memory of interactions that fundamentally shaped human development thousands of years ago. Such theories remain highly controversial and are rejected by mainstream historical scholarship. But what's undeniable is that the Merovingians themselves believed they were fundamentally different from ordinary humans, carrying a heritage that connected them directly to divine sources. Whether we interpret this belief literally or symbolically, it was the foundation of their approach to rulership and spirituality. This brings us to another crucial aspect of the Merovingian legacy, their sophisticated understanding of sacred geography and earth energies. The placement of Merovingian palaces, churches, and ceremonial sites wasn't arbitrary but followed a precise geomantic science, an understanding of how specific terrestrial locations connect to cosmic forces. Modern analysis using Geographic Information Systems (GIS) has revealed that major Merovingian sites form geometric patterns across the landscape. When mapped, perfect pentagrams, hexagrams, and more complex sacred geometries that would be invisible from ground level but become apparent when viewed from above. How did they achieve such precision without aerial surveying technology? The answer may lie in their preservation of ancient knowledge systems that understood the Earth as a living organism with its own energetic circulatory system. These earth currents, or dragon lines, what Chinese geomancy calls long mirror and Western esoteric tradition terms ley lines, were apparently well known to Merovingian planners, who placed important structures at key intersection points to harness their power. Specific sites would be chosen only after extensive testing by specially trained sensitives who could detect these subtle energies directly, a practice continued today by dowsers and geomancers. The most sacred Merovingian sites were invariably located at points where multiple energy lines converged, creating what esoteric tradition calls power nodes, or stargates, locations where the boundary between physical and non-physical realms is naturally thinner. These would become the foundations for the great Gothic cathedrals of later centuries, many of which were built directly atop earlier Merovingian sacred structures. This understanding of sacred geography extended beyond individual sites to entire regions. The area around Rennes-le-Château in southern France, so central to modern Merovingian mysteries, is structured around a specific sacred geometric pattern that mirrors certain star configurations, particularly those of the Cygnus constellation. This terrestrial zodiac encodes astronomical knowledge in the landscape itself, creating a perfect correspondence between heaven and earth. When certain structures within this terrestrial zodiac are activated through specific ritual practices at astronomically significant times, they allegedly create an energetic circuit that can enhance consciousness and facilitate communication with non-physical realms. The Merovingian kings would reportedly conduct ceremonies at these sites during solstices, equinoxes, and other astronomical alignments, timing their rituals to moments when cosmic forces were naturally aligned with terrestrial energy patterns. This practice wasn't unique to the Merovingians, but appears in sacred traditions around the world, from the Mayan understanding of cosmic cycles to the Hindu concept of auspicious times or muhurta. What made the Merovingian approach distinctive was their integration of these ancient wisdom traditions with the emerging Christian framework, creating a synthesis that preserved essential knowledge while adapting to the new religious paradigm. Their churches and sacred sites often incorporated solar symbolism disguised as Christian iconography, with Christ depicted with solar rays around his head. Positioned at the eastern end of the structure where the rising sun would illuminate specific features at significant times of year. Mary Magdalene was similarly associated with lunar symbolism, represented in ways that connected her to ancient goddess traditions while maintaining outward Christian orthodoxy. This solar-lunar symbolism reflected the Merovingian understanding of spiritual balance, the integration of masculine and feminine principles, of active and receptive energies, of spirit and matter. Unlike the increasingly patriarchal Christianity of Rome, which emphasized transcendence over immanence and spirit over matter, the Merovingian spiritual synthesis honored both poles of these dualities, seeking harmony rather than dominance of one principle over another. This balanced approach extended to their understanding of human physiology and spiritual development. Merovingian healing practices, preserved in fragmentary texts and oral traditions, describe the human body as containing energetic centers, remarkably similar to what Eastern traditions call chakras, focal points where spiritual energy can be concentrated and directed for both healing and consciousness expansion. Archaeological discoveries of Merovingian medical implements include unusual devices apparently designed to direct specific energetic frequencies to these body centers, copper or gold rods with precisely calculated dimensions, crystals cut to exact geometric specifications, and specialized oils and unguents whose chemical composition suggests knowledge of neurologically active compounds derived from plants like frankincense, myrrh, and certain rare herbs. The Merovingian healing touch, their famous ability to cure diseases like scrofula, wasn't regarded as miraculous in the conventional religious sense, but as the application of specific techniques for directing life energy, or what Eastern traditions call prana or chi. The king's hands were conduits for this energy, which his special bloodline and specific training allowed him to accumulate and direct with unusual power and precision. This sophisticated understanding of subtle energy and its applications places the Merovingians in a tradition that runs parallel to conventional history, a stream of esoteric knowledge preserved and transmitted through initiatory lineages rather than through mainstream educational institutions. This underground stream surfaces at various points in European history, in the Hermetic academies of Alexandria, in the Catholic communities of southern France, in the Templar preceptories, in Renaissance magical societies, and eventually in movements like the Rosicrucians and certain branches of Freemasonry. What unites these diverse manifestations is a core understanding that reality is fundamentally energetic rather than material, that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but channeled through it, and that certain techniques and substances can modify this channeling process to access broader fields of awareness. The Merovingians, with their alchemical practices and their emphasis on bloodline, represented a particular approach to this perennial wisdom, one that saw the physical body itself, specifically the blood, as a primary vehicle for spiritual development. This perspective helps explain the Merovingian emphasis on maintaining the purity of their bloodline through carefully arranged marriages. This wasn't just political strategy, but spiritual technology, an understanding that certain genetic combinations preserved and enhanced the capacity to channel specific energetic frequencies. Their long hair, never cut from birth, served as both symbol and tool of this channeling capacity, an extension of the nervous system that increased sensitivity to subtle energies. The Merovingian approach to spirituality was thus fundamentally embodied rather than abstract, seeing the physical form not as an obstacle to spiritual realization, but as its necessary vehicle. This stands in stark contrast to the increasingly dualistic Christianity of Rome, which tended to see the body as corrupt and the material world as fallen, emphasizing transcendence of physical reality rather than its sanctification. This brings us to one of the most significant aspects of the Merovingian legacy, their preservation of what might be called a somatic spirituality, an approach to the divine that honors and works through the body rather than seeking to transcend it. In this, they were continuing ancient traditions that understood the body itself as a temple, a microcosm of the universe, whose processes mirrored cosmic principles. Such an approach stands in sharp contrast to more familiar religious paradigms that emphasize obedience to external authority, whether scriptural or ecclesiastical. For the Merovingians, direct experience through the body was the primary spiritual authority, with texts and traditions serving as guides rather than absolute truth claims. This experiential emphasis would later emerge in various mystical movements throughout European history, from the Beguines and Beghards to the Quakers and certain contemplative orders. But the Merovingian approach was distinctive in its integration of this experiential emphasis with royal authority. The king wasn't just a political ruler, but a living embodiment of spiritual principles, his body literally channeling divine energies for the benefit of the land and people. This concept of sacred kingship, nearly universal in ancient cultures, but increasingly marginalized in medieval Europe, found its last great Western expression in the Merovingian dynasty. When the last true Merovingian king was deposed in 751 CE, replaced by Pepin the Short with papal blessing, it marked more than a political transition. It represented the triumph of a religious paradigm that located spiritual authority in institutional structures rather than embodied lineages, in apostolic succession rather than blood descent, in orthodox belief rather than direct experience. But the older paradigm didn't disappear entirely. It went underground, preserved in symbolic systems, in esoteric societies, in folk traditions, and perhaps most significantly, in bloodlines that continued to carry the Merovingian heritage across generations. These weren't necessarily royal or even noble families. The sacred blood could flow through the veins of peasants as well as princes, preserved by those who understood its significance, regardless of social station. This brings us to one of the most intriguing questions about the Merovingian legacy. If their bloodline did indeed survive, how might one recognize its modern carriers? According to esoteric traditions preserved by groups claiming connection to the original Praetorate of Sion, certain physical and psychological markers have been associated with Merovingian descent across the centuries. Physically, these allegedly include the distinctive red birthmark mentioned earlier, unusual eye colors, particularly in the blue-green-gray spectrum, with a tendency to shift hue in different lighting, above-average height, distinctive cranial proportions, including a high forehead and pronounced occipital ridge, unusually fine hair that tends to resist graying, and certain subtle features of hand structure, particularly relating to finger-length ratios and palmar creases. Psychologically, claimed Merovingian descendants are said to display distinctive traits from early childhood, unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, often manifesting as discomfort during thunderstorms or near high-voltage equipment, marked intuitive abilities sometimes appearing as precognitive dreams or spontaneous awareness of others' thoughts and feelings, natural healing capacities that may manifest through the hands, and a particular relationship to water, with many showing exceptional swimming abilities and comfort in aquatic environments from an early age. Most intriguingly, modern individuals claiming Merovingian heritage often report a specific recurring dream that they experience without prior knowledge of its significance. A dream of a subterranean chamber containing unusual objects including a golden cup or bowl, ancient texts in unfamiliar scripts, and a distinctive sword. This shared dream experience, reported by people with no apparent connection to each other, and often before they become aware of their possible Merovingian heritage, has been interpreted as a form of genetic memory, an inherited image encoded somehow in the DNA itself. Medical science remains skeptical of concepts like genetic memory extending beyond basic biological functions, and mainstream genetics doesn't recognize the possibility of inherited memories of specific objects or places. But emerging research in the field of epigenetics, the study of how genes are expressed rather than just their basic structure, has revealed that environmental influences can affect genetic expression in ways that can be passed down through multiple generations. Some researchers in this field have cautiously suggested that intense experiences might potentially create epigenetic markers that could influence not just physical traits, but possibly even certain aspects of consciousness in descendants. While direct inheritance of specific memories remains firmly in the realm of speculation, the possibility that certain tendencies of perception or awareness might be influenced by ancestors' experiences is no longer considered completely outside the realm of scientific possibility. This brings us to the modern scientific understanding of bloodlines and inheritance, which has been transformed by the advent of DNA analysis. Recent studies of Y chromosome markers passed exclusively from father to son and mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to all children have revealed surprising patterns in European genetic heritage, including certain rare haplogroups that don't fit neatly into expected population movements. One such haplogroup, found at unusually high frequencies in parts of southern France and northern Spain, precisely the regions associated with legends of surviving Merovingian bloodlines, shows genetic markers indicating Middle Eastern origin combined with certain unusual mutations, not typical of either European or Middle Eastern populations. Some researchers have suggested this might represent the genetic signature of the Merovingian bloodline, preserved in regional populations despite centuries of admixture with surrounding groups. DNA analysis of remains from confirmed Merovingian royal tombs has revealed similarly unusual genetic patterns, though the sample size remains too small for definitive conclusions. What's particularly interesting is that these royal remains show genetic markers similar to those found in the modern population of the restless region around Rennes-le-Chasseau, suggesting that if the bloodline did indeed survive, it may have done so precisely in the area most associated with Merovingian mysteries. This scientific approach to the Merovingian bloodline represents a fascinating convergence of ancient legend and modern technology. What was once the realm of esoteric speculation can now potentially be investigated through objective genetic analysis, opening new avenues for understanding this enigmatic dynasty and its possible modern descendants. But the significance of the Merovingian legacy extends far beyond questions of genetic inheritance. Their unique synthesis of Christian symbolism with older wisdom traditions created a template for Western esotericism that would influence European spiritual and intellectual development for centuries to come. The Hermetic academies of the Renaissance, the Rosicrucian manifestos of the 17th century, the esoteric Masonic systems of the 18th, and numerous modern spiritual movements all show traces of concepts and practices that can be traced back to the Merovingian court. Perhaps most significantly, the Merovingian emphasis on direct spiritual experience as the ultimate authority, rather than institutional structures or dogmatic beliefs, has remained a persistent countercurrent throughout Western religious history. From medieval mystics to Enlightenment freethinkers to modern alternative spirituality, this emphasis on personal gnosis, as opposed to external authority, represents a tradition of spiritual autonomy that has repeatedly challenged dominant paradigms. In this sense, the true legacy of the Merovingians may not be biological, but ideological, a persistent questioning of whether spiritual truth comes from without or within, whether divine authority is mediated through institutions or direct experience, whether the sacred is distant and transcendent or immanent in blood and flesh. These questions remain as relevant today as they were 15 centuries ago when the long-haired kings ruled what would become France. As we contemplate this legacy in our own time, we might ask ourselves, what does it mean to carry sacred blood? Is it literally about genetics and inheritance? Or is it a metaphor for the divine potential that resides in all human beings? Are certain lineages specially connected to divine sources? Or is divinity equally accessible to all who seek it? These are questions that each person must answer for themselves, drawing on both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. What's clear is that the Merovingian mystery continues to resonate across the centuries, challenging our assumptions about history, spirituality, and human potential. Whether we interpret their story literally or symbolically, the long-haired kings remind us that there may be more to our human heritage than conventional history, acknowledges ancient wisdom, lost technologies, and perhaps even bloodlines that connect us directly to divine sources. As we conclude this exploration, I invite you to consider the Merovingian legacy, not just as historical curiosity, but as a living question that may have relevance to your own spiritual journey. Whatever your background or beliefs, the mystery of the Merovingians offers an opportunity to contemplate the deeper currents of human history and the possibilities of human consciousness that extend beyond conventional understanding. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of history's most enigmatic dynasties. If you've enjoyed this exploration, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden dimensions of our shared past. And let me know in the comments what aspect of the Merovingian mystery resonates most strongly with you: their claims of sacred blood, their preservation of ancient wisdom, or the possibility that their legacy continues in the present day. Until next time, Remember that the greatest mysteries aren't found in distant stars or microscopic particles, but in the blood that flows through our veins and the consciousness that animates our being. The Code of the Merovingians invites us to look beyond the surface of reality to the sacred currents that move beneath ordinary perception, currents that have shaped human history and continue to influence our world in ways both subtle and profound. The quest for understanding never truly ends. It simply transforms, leading us ever deeper into the mystery of our own existence. In that spirit, I leave you not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainties, but possibilities. For it is in questioning that we truly honor the legacy of those who came before us, seeking wisdom in the shadows of history and the depths of human consciousness.